5 seconds to the open.
Ready?
Who wants to get this thing started right about now?
Welcome to Follow the Money Weekly with your host, Jerry Robinson.
Welcome.
Not just some guru.
Oh, really?
Your host is an economist and a best-selling author.
What an interesting news item. I'd better write that down.
And just someone who likes to make money and help you to make money. Welcome to Follow the Money Weekly. And here he is, Jerry Robinson.
Friends, welcome to you all around the world. Welcome to this very special episode of the Follow the Money podcast. My name is Jerry Robinson. You know, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and I'm talking about a lot. We got global markets that are pretty twitchy right now. We've got central banks that are very cautious. We've got pretty major inflection point playing out in Washington right now as well, not just in monetary policy, but also in foreign policy. So in this episode, we're going to move quickly through a handful of headlines that matter. I've got my little stack of stuff here. First up, we're going to talk about the intensifying situation between Israel and Iran and what it means for the U.S., what it means for our future. And then we're going to shift gears and talk about the Federal Reserve's upcoming interest rate decision. That's going to be out later today. I'm recording this on the 18th of June before the Fed actually makes their decision. We'll provide some pre-decision analysis. And then finally, we'll break down the Senate's passage of the Genius Act and what that signals for the future of digital assets in America. But let's begin with the most urgent issue, the rising risk of war. So as I record this episode on Wednesday, the 18th of June, 2025, the situation in the Middle East is growing more dangerous by the day and by the hour. Israel's military campaign against Iran has escalated rapidly. Civilian deaths are mounting, critical infrastructure has been bombed, and behind the scenes, the U.S. is being reeled right in, inch by inch. And President Trump, who once ran as the anti-war candidate, now appears to be flirting with the idea of joining this war on behalf of Israel. His administration has floated the idea of a U.S. strike upon Iran. Naval forces have been deployed to the region, and the rhetoric has turned downright apocalyptic. Trump has posted on social media just days ago that the U.S. knew the location of Iran's supreme leader, but had chosen not to act for now. And then he followed that up with a demand for Iran's unconditional surrender. Now, those are words you don't use unless you're prepared for escalation. Now, let's be honest here. Iran is not innocent in any of this. It is a repressive regime. It funds proxy militias across the region, and its nuclear ambitions are concerning. But war is not a video game. It's not a clean surgical solution. It's unpredictable, it's costly, and it's often irreversible. And here's the key point to me. Iran has not attacked the United States. And yet here we are again on the edge of another war in the Middle East, this time under a familiar excuse that we're defending democracy, or we're protecting our ally, or we're preventing a mushroom cloud. But we have heard this before, haven't we? What makes this moment especially troubling is the apparent disconnect between the U.S. intelligence agencies and political decision-making. According to reports, the U.S. intelligence community does not believe that Iran has made a decision to build a nuclear bomb, and they have reiterated that multiple times. Even the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, told Congress earlier this year that Iran halted its nuclear weapons program back in 2003 and has not restarted it. That comes directly from U.S. intelligence agencies and the Director of National Intelligence. Israel, on the other hand, has painted a far more alarmist picture. They've passed along intelligence that suggests that Iran is working on explosive trigger systems and neutron research and other very suspicious activity. And while that may all be true, the fact is that Israel has been saying this about Iran since the 1990s, specifically Bibi Netanyahu, who has been talking about how Iran is just months away from a nuclear bomb for the last 3 decades. And even our own analysts say that this looks more like Iran trying to maintain the option to build a bomb, not any evidence of a decision to do so now. Nevertheless, Israel's Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu has gone on television saying Iran is months away from a bomb once again, and that Israel has no choice but to strike first. And now the U.S. is being pulled toward a wider conflict in the Middle East again. There's an old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, right? Shame on me. And here we are, potentially being fooled a third time. Now, I know this is a very controversial issue, and that's why I want to say something very plainly here. I am not anti-Israel, and I am not anti-Iran. I am anti-war, especially unjustified, unprovoked, and unnecessary war. And in my opinion, this one checks all three boxes. And apparently I'm not alone. This potential war for the United States is deeply unpopular. A recent poll showed that 60% of Americans, including the majority of Trump voters, do not want the U.S. involved in another major conflict in the Middle East. Instead, they want diplomacy. They want restraint. They want peace. They don't want to send their sons and their daughters to die in another war that wasn't ours to begin with. And yet the military-industrial complex and the machinery of their wars grinds on. Now, I get it. There are obviously politics at play here. There are donors to please. There are alliances to maintain. But the truth is, this is not about freedom. And it's certainly not America first, as we have been told. Let's be honest about how we got here. This moment was made possible in part because President Trump took a $100 million donation from Miriam Adelson, a pro-Israel megadonor, during the last election cycle. And I don't believe that was a gift. I think it came with strings attached. Now, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. I'm saying that this is how influence works in Washington. And you and I both know it because we understand that you need to follow the money instead of paying attention to the flapping lips of politicians. And you know what else matters? Principles and restraint and wisdom and the courage to say, not this time. Because as I see it, America is at a crossroads. We can keep pouring blood and treasure into endless wars halfway around the world, or we can begin to prioritize peace, diplomacy, and our own crumbling economy here at home. America can be a force for restraint, or it can be a pawn in someone else's war. And one more thing just to bring it home. If this escalates and it comes out that we are striking Iran, don't be surprised when retaliation comes. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but it will come in many ways that could make September 11th look like a warning that we didn't heed. So I'll say it again, clearly. I oppose this war. I oppose dragging America into another foreign conflict, and I urge our leaders, especially those who claim to be pro-life and pro-peace and pro-America, to take a hard look at what they're about to unleash. Because once this door opens, it will not close easily.
September 11, 2001. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
War and danger. Continuing danger.
Hour of danger.
Very, very dangerous world.
A grave new threat.
Horrific acts of atrocity. Murderous regimes dedicating to killing us. Tyranny and terror. Slaughtered thousands.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons programs.
The deadliest of weapons.
Terrible weapons. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons.
Poison gas. Torture chambers. Mass graves.
Deadly technologies.
Radical ideology of hate.
Terror of threats.
Terror.
Terror.
War on terrorism. War against terrorism. Global terrorism.
Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Now, while the world's attention is focused on what's happening overseas, we can't afford to miss what's unfolding right here at home, especially in the financial system. And as I record this, the Federal Reserve is just hours away from releasing its latest interest rate decision. Now, nobody's expecting a surprise move today, although it's possible. The consensus is really that rates will stay put, and the real story isn't in the decision itself. It's really going to be in the messaging. Now, more specifically, the Fed is going to be releasing its infamous dot plot. And if you're not familiar, the dot plot is basically a scatter chart showing where each Fed official thinks interest rates should be by the end of the year, and going forward even beyond that. Now, it's become this strange ritual where investors try to read the tea leaves of where things are headed based upon a series of anonymous dots on a graph. Of course, those dots don't represent any kind of promise. They're not really a forecast. They're not even really a consensus. They're just educated guesses from 19 people who were doing their best to predict the unpredictable, and sometimes they really get it wrong. And we saw this last year. Back in June of 2024, the dot plot showed just one rate cut coming. And what did we get? Well, we actually got 4 cuts starting just a few months later. So the idea that this scatter chart somehow gives us clarity, well, it's a little bit silly. Now, Wall Street still treats it like gospel. Right now, everyone's obsessing over whether the median projection will show 1 cut or 2 for 2025. And you'd think the difference, that one little dot, would be minor, but it could completely reshape the market narrative this summer. And the reason is because it really signals how confident the Fed feels about inflationary pressures and the labor market, and of course, overall economic growth. And if we look at inflation, we've seen it certainly come down a bit in recent months, and that's good news, of course, but now we've got new tariffs coming. We have rising energy prices due to the Israel-Iran conflict, and there continues to be some uncertainty in the labor market. So the Fed really is in a tough spot as they head into this policy meeting. If they cut too soon, the risk is that they'll reignite inflationary pressures, especially if businesses see another green light to jack up prices like they did in the last round of inflationary pressures. But if they wait too long, of course, they could choke off what little growth is left and then tip us closer to a recession. So it's a big tightrope walk, just as the wind is beginning to pick up. So what do I expect today? Well, I personally expect the Fed to hold steady with no rate cut, no hike either, just more cautious language. They'll probably emphasize their data dependence, which is kind of a fancy way of saying we'll just wait and see. They'll probably also remind us that the dot plot is not a commitment of any kind. It's more of a snapshot in time, but markets are still going to react just like they always do. But here's the bigger point for our listeners, and it's the one I make constantly, is that when central bankers are in this kind of uncertainty, when they have this kind of uncertainty going on at that level, and when markets are this volatile, and when monetary policy is being influenced by geopolitics and then new tariffs and investor psychology all at once, you, my listeners, you need a plan, a personal financial plan that doesn't rely upon guessing what the Fed's next move is. Because while Powell and company up at the Fed are wrestling with inflation expectations and softness in the labor market, you've got bills to pay, right? You've got a future to plan for. You've got capital to protect. And the people who tend to do best in this kind of environment are the ones who tune out the noise and they think longer term. They focus upon real assets. They focus upon a diversified plan, and they maintain a disciplined strategy. So while Wall Street is reading between the dots today, don't lose sight of what actually matters, your plan, your priorities, and perhaps most importantly, your peace of mind. So while the Federal Reserve wrestles with interest rates this week, something much bigger may have quietly happened, and it could change the way that money moves in our economy for decades to come. So the U.S. Senate just passed a new bill, and I don't say this lightly, that may end up being one of the most consequential financial bills in decades. It's called the Genius Act, And in short, it officially brings US dollar-backed stablecoins underneath federal regulation. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with stablecoins, but if not, for those who are unfamiliar, a stablecoin is basically a digital token that's pegged one-to-one to the US dollar. So it's basically a programmable dollar, backed by cash or treasuries, and then transacted over blockchain networks. Now, with stablecoins, there are no middlemen, there's no borders, they settle in seconds, not days, and for years, these tokens existed in a very legal gray zone. They weren't quite money, and they weren't quite securities, but they were growing very fast. And today there's nearly $200 billion in stablecoins in circulation, most of it used in the digital asset markets. But now with this new Genius Act, Washington is stepping in and saying, we're going to regulate this space and we're going to define the rules and we're going to decide who gets to issue these things. Now, on one hand, this is a huge deal because it gives long overdue clarity to a space that's been operating without a seat at the table. And it opens the door for U.S. institutions, even banks, to begin offering stablecoin services. And it may actually strengthen the U.S. dollar on the global stage because if you think about it, every stablecoin in circulation is another digital ambassador for the U.S. dollar. And in our age of de-dollarization, where China and BRICS nations and others are trying to weaken the dollar's role in the global economy, this is potentially one of the smartest defenses that we've seen so far. If America wants to stay at the center of the global financial system, it obviously has to modernize, and it has to meet the market where it's going, and right now, that's digital. So yes, there's reason to be cautiously optimistic. This could be the beginning of a 21st century monetary system, one that's faster and cheaper and more inclusive and more global. But we still have to be cautiously optimistic, right? Because whenever Congress gets involved in innovation, there's always a risk that they hand the keys to the wrong players. Some critics of the Genius Act worry that it gives too much power to the big banks and big tech in particular, and leaves smaller independent players in the dust. Others are asking fair questions about transparency and surveillance and whether this paves the way for a future central bank digital currency, the kind that tracks every transaction that you make. There's also the uncomfortable reality that the members of the Trump family reportedly have stakes in some crypto ventures that will benefit from this Genius Act. And yet, here we are, watching bipartisan legislation move with very unusual speed. So the big question really boils down to this. Is this all about innovation and leadership, or is it about control and consolidation? Well, maybe both, right? Here's the bottom line. The way money works is changing, and it's changing fast. And the countries that adapt, that embrace digital infrastructure, that modernize their financial systems, that empower innovators, they're going to lead in the 21st century. Now, upon my review of the Genius Act, I find it to be far from perfect, but I think it's a sign that Washington sees the writing on the wall, that the monetary standards are shifting, and that Washington just made it clear that America doesn't want to be left behind. All right, friends, welcome back to the final moments of today's broadcast. And before we wrap up today, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge something important that's happening this week, the federal holiday known as Juneteenth. For those who don't know the full backstory, Juneteenth marks the day in 1865 when the last remaining enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, were finally told that they were free, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth really serves as a sobering reminder of how slow justice can be and how long freedom can take to arrive, even after it's been declared. And it's also a moment that I believe is worth honoring, because Juneteenth isn't just about looking back. It's about recognizing the unfinished work of liberty. It's about remembering that freedom in any generation is rarely handed down nice and neat. It's won, it's protected, and it has to be lived out, not just legislated. Here on the Follow the Money podcast, we talk a lot about economic freedom. We talk about personal sovereignty. We talk about staying informed and independent in a noisy and manipulative world. And Juneteenth is a good reminder that those values have a history and a cost. So wherever you are this week, I hope you'll pause and reflect, not just on the pain of the past, but on the power of perseverance and the hope that freedom, real freedom, is still worth pursuing in every area of our life. And that is just something to think about. Well, once again, thanks for joining me today. And remember, friends, to stay focused, stay informed, and as always, follow the money. We'll see you right back here next time. And until then, God bless.
Contained on the Follow the Money podcast is strictly for informational and educational purposes. It should not be construed as specific investment advice. The views and opinions of our guests and sponsors, including Tom Cloud, are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of FTMDaily.com or Robinson Media Group, LLC. Jerry Robinson does hold an insurance license and at times may offer consulting on life insurance and fixed retirement income products. Follow-up, individualized responses to email or phone requests that involve the rendering of personalized investment advice for compensation will not be made absent compliance with state investment advisor registration requirements or an applicable exemption or exclusion and applicable insurance regulations. Past performance is not indicative of future results. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on the podcast. Remember, never do your financial planning through podcast or radio. It's your money. Be wise. Do your due diligence and always consult a trusted financial professional before making any financial decisions.